we got about 10 minutes to wait for some folks to come. And this is well, it's not a real lengthy presentation, but I tried to cram the key points of what it'd go over an entire semester in an hour. So, even before we get started, anybody have any questions, like pre-presentation questions?
So what semester, where do you teach?
Pardon me?
Where do you teach?
I don't teach anymore. I was at Westchester University
Oh, okay.
down by Philadelphia, and then I taught online for a college called Excelsior. And Excelsior had mostly, when I taught for them, they had mostly military people. I'd have classes of entirely military guys that were either in Afghanistan or Kuwait. One guy was in a submarine, I think, off the coast of China.
Wow.
But they were all military guys. That college catered to the military.
And what did you teach?
Sociology, criminal justice, social psychology.
Huh.
Where's Freddie?
Oh.
Home? Oh, one time I'm hurt to you. You did.
And then you can see how
Yeah.
Oh no.
So are you putting your tattoo on or taking it off?
You know, that one's coming off. I gotta do it over again. Maybe I'll change the color from that purple.
What was it? It's like a mountain castle.
It was a Disney
Oh
castle.
yeah, little mouse ears. Yeah, with of course with the Disneyland behind. I went to Disneyland when I was a month old.
Oh.
That's how old I am. And I met Walt Disney. Yeah, and I took his photo. He waited for me.
That's incredible. So jealous.
You wouldn't know we were extremely old. I mean, I didn't even know it for a long time. Well, Grandma, he had charge of. That's me. I think it's just
My aunts took me because she loves Disney and goes all the time. And I've been wanting to forever.
Disney World or Disneyland?
We went to Disney World.
It's so huge.
We were there for like a week, and I think we did every park. I'm still tired.
I met some friends. It was a destination vacation. There were like 3 of us came from 3 different places, and we met there. I was the designated driver.
That sounds really cool. I like that idea, doing a little meet up at Disney. That sounds so
Yeah.
cool.
We had a choice, Pittsburgh or Orlando.
Definitely.
I think so. It was hard on my friend though. His wife was pregnant and she had a 2-year-old. It was hard. Getting out of a suitcase for a week in a hotel room. It's not easy.
No.
Single, it's easy, hey. I love being single.
You and me both.
Huh?
You and me both.
Oh. I didn't love being single until I was 50. That's pretty bad, you know, because I had to have someone else. And it was always horrible,
Yeah.
of course, with that kind of intention, you know.
Oh yeah.
I didn't know I could live a full life on my own.
Yes.
Married very long.
Yes.
Would you like a bottle of water? Here's a list of upcoming events.
Yeah. pretty hair. I love redheads. It's supposed to be amazing hair.
We don't really try to. I feel like they've done a couple, like if we've sent them articles, we very rarely, then they.
I think you could send somebody over.
Well, yeah, well,
For a little town, I think that would be a good for all your, I guess that, even if it's only
yes, I think.
2 or 3 inches.
I see what you're saying, that's a thought.
And then say, next presentation is on such and such, which will be
Yeah,
whatever by so and
that's a
so.
good idea. But I don't know if they would like make us, like, that they would consider it an
You
act.
do this like every week or,
We do it usually the first and third Friday of the month.
that's not overtaxing as far as,
Huh?
that's not overtaxing them, asking them to cover this.
Yeah,
I think it would give you support for the next person.
that's true.
Cause in advance, who is we say like, announce the date and the time.
Yeah.
But Dr. J and I were talking, Jay Buchanan,
Yeah.
last
He
night.
came and talked.
Yeah, and he was telling me, I said, they need more help and more support from the newspaper, because I already told them that. I said, okay.
Yeah, I don't, I'm like that in charge of stuff, but I like that idea.
Okay. Well, I guess it's getting about that time, so we'll get started, and if anybody else just wanders in, that's fine. This is kind of informal, it's not meant to be a, high strung or anything like that. I try to make things as simple as I could. And what I'm going to talk about is why people commit crime and how this kind of evolved. At one time, people really didn't care why people committed crime. They just tried them. They either found them guilty and usually put them to death because there weren't prisons until the 18th century, 19th century, or they went home or they got put to death. So, and especially with juvenile crime, it was difficult for people to convict a teenager or someone younger of a serious crime, although they may have committed homicide, because they didn't want to submit them to the kind of conditions that were in the prisons that did exist. So things were kind of out of control. I always taught from the socio-historic approach, I called it, and I kind of did that with this. Now, before we get started, come on, where you at? Where's my cursor? Oh, Miss Debbie, where's my cursor?
Where's your glasses? Okay, that was your wife that said that.
Somewhere over here. Here.
Geoffrey, that's such a cute
Okay.
card.
We have a door prize at the end of the presentation, a weekend giveaway for 3 days and 2 nights in South Block B with an inmate of your choice. Includes transportation, meals, travel expenses, and recreational privileges. So you might be the lucky winner here. You could pick from Bubba, Big Butch, or Tyrone. Some of you know that I worked at the prison. I started at Western Penitentiary in 1973. Before that, I worked with juveniles in Monongahela Police Department for about a year and a half. And I ended up here from 79 to 88 as the deputy superintendent of the prison. So I've seen a lot of inmates and I've seen a lot of crime, and just by the School of Hard Knocks, a lot of this stuff comes to mind with me. Okay. One size never fits all. When you talk about theories of crime, you can't come out and say one thing causes crime and leave it at that. You have to look at each individual, why did that person commit crime? And some of these theories would apply to them and some wouldn't. But you can kind of understand the person better, and if you can understand a person better, you may be able to help them. Originally, theorists looked at only one simple thing, oh, this is what causes all crime. And but as time went on, things have got more complex, especially after the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment is whenever they developed what was called the scientific method, and it was based on research, gathering empirical data, which means things that you could measure, and the science of criminology got started. And but in every one of these theories, as I show you in these coming slides, they all had exceptions. So you had to have exceptions to make this one theory fit everything, and that's why it made the shoe fit. Now, if you have questions, we go along, we can answer that. First of all, what constitutes a crime? Before we talk about crime. Well, it's an act that violates the norms of society or is declared as a violation of law by a legal entity. Like, the legislature usually enacts crimes. In an aristocracy or a monarchy, you'll have just one person can say that's a crime. Like the King of England could say the hunting the king's deer in Sherwood Forest is illegal. Made Robin Hood and all his merry men a bunch of crooks. You know, so that could happen like that. But you have to have somebody that declares, or some body declares, that a certain behavior is illegal. But it also has to have a couple other parts. It has to be published to be actually in today's world that it's a crime. And it also has to be enforced. If you don't enforce an act that you say is illegal, it's really not illegal. One of my big peeves is handicapped parking spots. How many times have you ever seen a citation on the windshield of somebody parked in a handicapped spot? No sticker, no license plate, nothing whatsoever that indicates that this person is handicapped. I've never seen a citation, although you see the signs up saying maximum penalty $250, blah 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 blah. That's really not a law because nobody enforces it. Now, did anybody ever see anybody get a citation for that? You did?
Yes, it was in Philadelphia, and she didn't see it. So she had me take a photograph, and the sign was like 8 feet in the air, and she was 5 feet tall, and she would never have parked in it if she had known, but that was before they painted the ground.
That's
so
a
she would
rarity.
have had to bend her head all the way back. But she did go to court. I don't know what she had to pay or not, but
I've seen monster trucks parked in those spots, motorcycles. No, really, I did see a motorcycle once, and
I saw a nurse parked in there. I was with her. I was humiliated.
So you get the general idea about it.
Yeah.
What are some other laws? What are some other acts that are illegal that aren't enforced?
Texting while you're driving.
Besides politics.
Oh, they'll get you for that if they see you doing
If they
it.
see you.
But yeah, they have to see you. So you get the general idea. Okay. Now, if you have questions, just ask away, and if we get a little short, we'll let you kind of know. First of all, let's look at a couple of types of crime. First, you can look at crime by structure. There's two basic types of crime. It's based on structure, and it also affects what the cause would be as far as the underlying cause by the person committing it. Organized crime, disorganized crime. And they're sort of like what they say they are. In an organized crime, you go prepared. You know you're going to, like, say, for example, rob a bank. So you take your mask or your whatever to camouflage your face. You take your gun. You make plans for your getaway. In other words, you plan it. If you're a rapist, you carry what we call a rape kit with you. In a small bag, you have a rope, something to gag the person, maybe even some chloroform or something to knock them out, something like that. So that in an organized crime, you go into it with the full intention that this is what I'm going to do. These are the things I need to accomplish the act, and there's no doubt that that's what you intended to do. Now, disorganized crime is like a crime of opportunity. You're in a store, and a clerk leaves the cash register open and walks in the back, and you think, wow, all that money in there. You grab a handful of money and you leave the store. You didn't plan to rob that place, but it was just an opportunity, and you took advantage of it. So that's the difference between here. And then when you look at the kind of offenses, these are basic ones: property crime, any kind of theft or burglary, anything like that. Crimes of assault, anything from I think if you curse at somebody, that's like verbal assault. You can actually be arrested for that. Moral violations, that can include anything from pornography to rape and indeviant sexual intercourse. That was a big crime they had on For years I wondered what does IDSI stand for. I had somebody explain it to me. And also crimes of treason and political crimes. But those are the basic classifications. Okay, in the beginning, for all you Catholics out there, St. Thomas Aquinas was one of the original theorists that addressed crime. He's most known for his work in the Catholic Church with theology and all that other good stuff. And he was a Dominican friar, a priest, a philosopher, and he was around during the medieval period, around 1200. Well, there's years there. He's 50 years old when he died, roughly 1225 to 1274. Basically, what he said was that man was naturally good, and that the reason he commits crimes is because there is some deficiency or illness in the body, that it's either mental or physical. And he also believed that once you return to good health, you won't commit crime anymore. Now, that's pretty simple. You'd shoot a lot of holes in all these theories, but he basically, thought that man was naturally good. Well, a few years later, a guy named Thomas Hobbes shows up and he says, Aquinas didn't have the right answer. Man's naturally bad. You know, Hobbes was influenced by a lot of negative things. He witnessed a lot of violence and hostility in England. There was a revolution of some kind back in the day, around in the early 1600s in England, where he was involved in, wasn't involved, but he witnessed a lot of bloodshed from that. He was in France for a number of years, where he was present with a lot of guillotining, lopping heads off for the simplest of infractions, and so he had a lot. And also his personal life was terrible. His father was the vicar of the church, and one time he had a temper tantrum. The father did on the steps of the church, and he took his son Thomas and his two brothers and sent them off to live with their uncle, and never saw him anymore, because he felt they weren't good kids, and they interfered with his job as the vicar, and so he was exposed to a lot of negative type stimuli, and he believed that it was natural for man to seek his own self-interest, to be competitive, and he was driven by self-preservation. And if there wasn't a very strong society set up as far as controls like police and punishment and whatever, he said man would fall back into brutishism and misery. So, he advocated a real strong police state to keep the people in order. And those were for the longest time, those were basically the two opposing theories or views. So either man was naturally good or man is naturally bad. Okay. Then comes along the classical theory, or the classical school of criminology. Now, this was developed during the Age of Enlightenment, which I told you about before. Started to develop with empirical knowledge, things that you could measure. People started to give up on the hocus pocus type of stuff, like the Earth is flat, the Earth is the center of the universe. Ideas like that. And this guy Jeremy Bentham and these two guys at Beccaria, basically the premise they had was that people commit crime after weighing the benefits against the risks, which is a concept called econometrics. Now, we do that every day. When you buy a lottery ticket, I never buy a lottery ticket for a measly $1 million. It's not worth $10 to me. I usually buy them a $10 bunch. It used to be 5 tickets, now I think it's only 2. But anyway, bottom line is, for $1 million, I don't bother to buy a ticket. If you had a $100 prize and the tickets were $10 a piece, I wouldn't bother to buy a ticket, because the payoff isn't enough. But when it's like $1 billion, like, oh yeah, the risk of $10 to gain $1 billion is worth the effort. Now, people do the same thing with crime. They go into a place like They go into a place like, there was a place called Jake's Bar in, where I taught at Westchester. And if you would go in to rob Jake's Bar, he might have a couple $100 there, and he also had a shotgun under the bar, so he'd blow your head off if you went in and tried to rob his couple $100. I used to tell the students, if you really want to weigh this benefit for money versus risk, rob the Wawa. The Wawa, or the sheet store for that matter, Wawa were down in Chester County in Philadelphia. Of course, sheets are up here, but basically the same kind of store. I'd say rob the Wawa. The Wawa has $15,000 to $20,000 in receipts by 10 o'clock in the morning. They got some little old lady or some college student working behind a counter. It's not their money. They couldn't care less. And they have been trained that if you get robbed, do whatever they want, give them all the money they want. Don't worry about the money. We don't want you to get hurt. Okay? So I told them, if you really are serious about weighing risk versus reward, Wawa is your best choice, not Jake's. And you know what? About 2 months after that, my wife back there reading the newspaper, she says, "Did you have a Dominic Rodriguez?" I can't remember his real name, but it was an Hispanic name. She said, "Do you have a Dominic Rodriguez in class?" I said, "I did, but he quit coming." And I said, "I don't know whatever happened to him." She goes, "Well, he just robbed the Wawa."
For real.
And he was,
True story.
yeah, remember that?
Yeah, I
And I was sweating. I was terrified for the rest of the semester that some detective or public defender is going to walk into my office and say, "Did you tell Dominic to rob the Wawa?" And I said, "Yeah, actually I did." You know? I don't know who would be in more trouble, him or me. But that's basically econometrics. And you can use that principle for anything you do in life. Are the benefits worth the risk? Okay. Also part of the classical theory was that a well-designed justice system can tip the scale towards law-abiding behavior. In other words, if you didn't have any risk as far as being prosecuted for a crime, then why not do it? And that kind of ties in with Hobbes to a degree. Based on free will and choice, which is the econometrics, proportionality and deterrence, that's the other thing. If you are caught, the crime has to be proportionate to the offense. You don't cut heads off for parking in the handicap spot. You fine people money, yes, but you do not go to excess. Otherwise, then you become like a victim of the system, and that just makes things worse. And then basically it also says it's a social contract between the governed and the governing. Okay, and you can see the influence that has on the modern legal system. Doo-dee-doo. Now we're getting into what's called the positive school of criminology. Positive school was developed by a guy named Lombroso back in 1876. He wrote a book called L'Uomo Delinquente, which for you Italians out there means criminal man. And in this book, he basically described from a physical perspective, more than anything else, what kind of people committed crime, not so much their motive, but he identified people that were criminals. And he did this by doing detailed examinations and autopsies on dead prisoners. And there were like hundreds of dead prisoners he examined. He measured their skull, looked at their cheekbones, looked at their physical abnormalities and things like that. And he said the criminals were what he called atavists, which were evolutionary throwbacks to a previous state, either lacking qualities of law-abiding folks or possessing unusual physical or mental traits, which I'm going to show you. I'm going to list those for you in a second. And he said if you had 5 or more of these traits, or I think 13 he identified total. He said if you had 5 or more, you were a natural-born criminal. So you basically was something beyond your control. You were doomed as doom could be. One of the things that's bad, well, here, I'll tell you about what's bad about it after I go through this next slide. Here's some of these atavistic traits. Impulsivity, cruelty, lack of empathy or remorse, propensity for violence. You could see where that would get you in trouble all the time. And a lack of, and those are some of the key points of being a psychopath, which basically most serious criminals are. And not all psychopaths are criminals. You gotta have a little bit of a psychopath in you to be a good used car salesman, or an insurance salesman for that matter. You have a distorted sense of right and wrong. Reduced sensitivity to pain. You have an asymmetrical face, which means, now if you took a normal person and you took a magic marker and put it right down in the middle of your face, this side should look exactly like this side, except for some scars or bruises or whatever else you got since you were born. With the criminal, this side will have maybe a drooping lip, an eyeball that's a little bit off, stuff like that. Also talked about large jaws, protruding cheekbones, irregular teeth, and got some more stuff here for you on that. Heavy eyebrows, long arms, unusual shaped skulls, extra toes or missing toes or fingers. I think I already said reduced sensitivity to pain and the restlessness. Fascination with tattoos, which he linked to primitive and tribal behavior, and he developed all this in what's called the science of criminal anthropology. Now, some of the problems with this. Obviously, you can see how this would lead to racism, and it would lead to ethicism, racism based on ethics, your ethnic background, and so that's one problem. It also doesn't take any consideration for psychological or environmental issues. So this was kind of a thing of its time because people liked what they heard, but it was very unscientific and it wasn't very practical as time went on. Now he also wrote a book, this Lombroso fellow, about the female offender in 1895. You women will like this. He said there was less crime among women because they were less evolved than men. And, excuse me. And he also said that the women that were committing crimes were either influenced by men to commit the crime, or they were like tomboys. They had masculine traits. So that's basically what he was looking at. Okay. Lombroso said there were 4 different types of crooks. Born criminal who had at least 5 of those biological defects. Criminal by passion, strong emotions and moral outrage. You come home, you find your wife in bed with the milkman. You beat them both to death with a glass bottle of 2% milk. You know, the crime of passion, that's the kind of thing you see. Habitual criminal is driven by environmental factors and repeated offenses. And then there's the occasional, you got to add this is one of the exception. The occasional criminal who had unusual circumstances. So this is kind of a way to justify crime among the elite and the higher ups. Okay. That kind of went the way of the dodo bird. And was, boy, I don't know why this throat is so bad. And it was replaced by biological theories of crime. Now this is one of my favorites of the top 3. It was influenced by Darwin, and it's basically idea about how crime runs in a family. Now I know for a fact that crime runs in a family, but the real question is why. I had at Western Penitentiary, we had, no, it was Huntington. We had the Weakland brothers. We had 2 brothers doing time at Huntington. Their sister was in Muncie, and their father was in another prison. That's one case. Another case, I had an inmate named Stanley Haas, probably the most notorious inmate in the Pennsylvania system for many years. Killed a prison guard on December 10th, 1974, when I was at Western Penitentiary. And then he shipped him to Huntington. So when I left Western and went to Greensburg, then I came to Huntington. He was there waiting for me in Huntington. But he was absolutely brutal. He's the definition of psychopath. If you look up psychopath, you'll see Stanley Haas's picture. I mean, that's how bad he was. One day, a guy comes in named Burns, and I'm reading his record, and I'm saying his father is Stanley Haas. I says, why aren't you using the name Haas instead of Burns? He goes, I didn't want to be stigmatized by my father's name, so I used my mother's maiden name. I said, oh, okay. Well, he said that, but it wasn't too long before he ended up being locked up because he broke a guy's jaw with a couple of barbells that he brought in from the prison yard. And how that happened was, when you talk about these different characteristics, he was using some weights out in the yard. One of the bikers went up to him and said, and this guy was a kind of a small stature fellow. He said, hey, punk, these are our weights. Get out of here. And he looks around, there's like 7 or 8 of them. He goes, oh, okay, sure, no problem. Well, he brought in one of the dumbbells, hand dumbbells. Snuck it in with him from the yard. Went over to the guy in the cell block. Took the barbell, whacked him upside the head with it, busted his jaw up pretty good. Dropped the dumbbell. He did it right in front of the sergeant's desk. Dropped the dumbbell. I give up. Okay. So he knew exactly. Now that was an organized crime. He knew exactly what to do, because he would have done that where he didn't have the protection of the guard at the desk. They would have beat him to death. His homies would have attacked him. So he knew exactly what he was doing. Well, he ended up, it was one thing after another, just like that, after that first offense. So he was just like the old man. And there's a number of other cases that I can remember where we had, I remember I used to make phone calls for some guy who was, I don't know if it was wife or his sister. That wouldn't be genetics if it was his wife. But she was in Muncie and he was in Western. But anyway, now I also have a thing about the criminal gene theory, which nobody's ever talked about. You know how there's an A1 gene, that if you have the A1 gene, you're prone to alcoholism? And they also, because supposedly they argue about this, whether or not there's a gay gene where you have a propensity to become gay, either lesbian or homosexual. Well, I always felt that there might be a criminal gene out there that's attached to the male chromosome. And that would explain why you would have more crime among men, and it would also explain why a lot of people, why it runs in a family, because the chromosome gets passed through the genetics. I had when I was in the Army, there was a fella, we were both ROTC, and this other guy was working on his doctorate in biochemistry, and he had a theory about there's a cancer gene. And if you have, and that's what he's writing a dissertation about, that if you have this cancer gene, then any exposure you have to like smoking or asbestos, working in a polluted environment like a steel mill or something like that, you would aggravate this gene and it would cause cancer cells to develop. If you didn't have the cancer gene, then you could smoke all you wanted to, which is why some people are 90 years old still smoking 5 packs a day. So if you don't have the cancer gene, you might die of emphysema, but you never die of cancer because you just couldn't get it. I gotta look him up someday. Oh, what'd you do here? Miss Debbie, what'd you do to me? I'm back here. There we go. Okay. Another part of the biological theories have to do with brain function, and how the prefrontal cortex and other parts of the brain are different in a criminal than they are in a non-criminal. And also there's a study, or there's a science called psychophysiology, that talks about people who have these abnormalities in their brain function have increased risk-taking behavior. And the other thing about risk-taking behavior, the more, like in gangs, the more people you have, the more you have to outdo the next guy. So if somebody turns around and like beats up somebody younger than them in a gang, they go through and that's all fine and dandy. Then the next guy wants to outdo him, so he attacks somebody older, and with his fist. Then the next guy attacks somebody with a knife. Then the next guy shoots somebody. So it's just like escalating. The more people in a group, the more likely you're going to have a more serious act that's going to occur, because all the guys don't want to be outdone. Oh, I can do better than that. That kind of attitude. Then comes along a guy named William Sheldon, who basically said that whether or not you're a criminal depends on your body type, which he called somatotypes, which is basically the tissues you have. And he said there were three basic types of personalities and body type. There's a different personality with each body type. And he called these the endomorph, the mesomorph, and the ectomorph. Endomorph, round, soft body, fat, wider waist, has a viscerotonic temperament, which means they like luxury, they like to be comfortable, they want a full belly, things like that. They're sociable, comfort-seeking, emotional, stuff like that. Then there's the mesomorph, who's muscular, athletic build, broad shoulders, low body fat. He has a muscular temperament, somatomic temperament, that's assertive, high energy, dominant, and aggressive. And then the ectomorph is somebody tall, thin, has a fast metabolism rate. He's sensitive, anxious, and thoughtful. Now, Sheldon said that most of your criminals come from the mesomorph. Now, this made a lot of sense before guns became so prevalent on the street. Because if you wanted to be a criminal, would you be short and fat and slow and basically the endomorph? You wouldn't be very successful because you got to rely on your legs to get away from the police. Well, if the mesomorph, endomorph is running at a fast like 2 miles per hour at the most, he's going to get run down by the police very quickly, and he's going to be a very unsuccessful crook. You'd also have to be rather strong as far as like being able to force your way on other people. So that's which the endomorph wouldn't be able to do. Now the mesomorph, on the other hand, would have all those positive qualities. He'd be energetic, he'd be athletic, he could be able to run from the police, and all those other types of things. And that's where the bulk of criminal behavior comes from, that athletic type build. And then the ectomorph is basically your nerd, or you're someone who is quite like an Oppenheimer. If you ever saw pictures of Robert Oppenheimer, he'd probably like the perfect ectomorph. And Sheldon said that everybody has all three of these qualities to some degree, and you could rate the person from a 1 to 7 on each type. For example, let's pick Benny over here, Benny Bellucci. Okay. What kind of endomorphic qualities does Benny have? Not too many. He's not rounded. He doesn't have a soft body. He doesn't have much fat content. He has a thin waist. Although he is kind of sociable, and he's probably comfort-seeking. But so he has some endomorphic qualities when it comes to his personality. So I would kind of probably give him a 2. Mesomorph, athletic build, broad shoulders, body fat. Some of these just don't sound like Benny. But he is kind of more athletic built than a lot of guys. His shoulders aren't that broad, but he does have low body fat. He's assertive when he needs to be. And he has a lot of high energy from everything he does. But he's not dominant or aggressive. So let's give him a 4. So he'd be a 2-4. And an ectomorph, he's slim. His frame is rather fragile. He has narrower shoulders. I don't know about his metabolism. But he's not very sensitive and doesn't have a lot of anxiety, but he is thoughtful. So ectomorph-wise, he'd probably score, I think, about a 4 or 5. So we're looking here like at a 2, 4, 5 for Benny Bellucci. Now, if we were looking at a, like, maybe Koch over there, he'd score a lot higher in the mesomorph category. So I'd say him is maybe like a 1, 6, 1, 6, 2, something like that. But that's what he worked on there. Now, like I said, they say God made all men and Sam Colt made all men equal. That's whenever this thing kind of goes the way to Dodo Bird. Because you no longer have to be, and then you also have motorcycles and other ways to get away, cars. So you don't have to be fast on your feet anymore. You don't have to be the strongest guy to assert your will over somebody with a strong armed robbery and things like that. Okay. Oh, where we at? Here's another one of my favorites, differential association theory. This explains crime in a lot of different ways. And it also explains not just crime, but why you become a plumber, why you become a priest, why you become a bricklayer, a coal miner, or anything else. It was developed by a guy named Edwin Sutherland. Kind of looks pretty academic over there. He basically said that criminal behavior is learned through communication interaction with others, especially within primary and intimate social groups such as family and close friends. In other words, you become who you loaf with. Now, core principles. Criminal behavior is learned, not inherited. And how do you learn? Like growing up, you learn from your parents. Boys learn from their father. They want to be just like their father when they grow up. If your father was in the army, you want to be in the army. If you're, well, being a coal miner, my father was a coal miner. I never did have an inspiration to be a coal miner. And, but that's different things like that. Principal learning occurs in intimate social groups. Like the closer you are and the more you trust other people, the more likely you're going to be just like them. Learning includes techniques of committing crime and the motives, drives, rationalizations, attitudes to justify them. In other words, there's a right way and a wrong way to rob a bank. There's a right way and a wrong way to do any crime. The same way there is a right way and a wrong way to write a paper in school or to apply for a job or anything like that. And whenever you're dealing with criminal behavior, you have to rationalize it, and you have to have an attitude that justifies it. Like, for example, you rob from somebody, oh, they can afford it. I didn't really hurt them. You know, the bank never lost any money because they're insured. Things like that. Moving on here with these core principles. You learn a motive to be a criminal, whether or not you have definitions of the law that are favorable or unfavorable. Now, if you believe the law is, if you have a favorable view of the law, less likely you'll be a criminal and disobey it, even for something like speeding. I realize I can't speed because I'm endangering myself and others. But if you have an unfavorable definition of the law, like I can control my car just because it says 55 miles an hour, I can control my car and I'm safe driving 80. Then you're going to become a speeder, which breaks the law. You become a criminal when your definitions favorable to violating the law exceed those that are unfavorable. And the way this works out a lot is in the frequency, duration, priority, intensity you have with a group you identify with. For example, frequency, like for example the gang. Okay, say you're growing up in your city. There's a gang on every block. Frequency, how often do you visit the gang at the headquarters? Are you there every day? Do you stop in once a week just to say hi to the guys because they're neighbors and you don't want to isolate yourself from them? Duration, how long do you stay? Just stop by, have a beer, say hello, and leave? Or are you there for like all day long? And sometimes all night long? Priority, how important is it for you to be with the gang? Would you miss a Pirate baseball game if they gave you free tickets so you could be with the gang? Would you miss your mother's birthday or your brother's birthday to be with the gang? That's your priority. And intensity, what would you do? To what extent would you do an act for the gang? Would you steal a few things out of a store that they want? Cigarettes, candy, whatever. Or would you kill somebody for the gang? You know, that's the intensity. And basically, in this differential association theory, you learn criminal behavior the same way you would learn anything else. You learn to be a good librarian by interacting with others, by taking classes. Well, you wouldn't take classes to become a criminal, not in a formal sense, but you would in an informal sense. Guys would show you how to disarm a burglar alarm, things like that. And criminal behavior will meet the same needs and values that non-criminal behavior would. Like, if you're a non-criminal and you're out there working and you're interacting in a community and contributing, you're getting a sense of value, you're getting a sense of accomplishment and success. While being a crook, it's the same thing. You know, what was the guy's name? Willie Sutton had the most expensive, had the biggest robbery in history. But there was, you know, how much money did you get from, well, if you watch Goodfellas, they did that Lufthansa robbery of the airline. They got, I think, $13 million. They were really like, oh, that was the epitome of success. You know, they had to pay off the bosses and everybody else, but they were like top dog. You know, you become a made man that way. And so that's basically being a criminal. You're going to get the same feelings of success and accomplishment as you would if you become the president of Juniata College. This one. The labeling theory. This is a goodie. This is also called social reaction theory. This doesn't deal with the individual as much as it deals with the environment or the people in charge. The most powerful people in society create crime by labeling some behaviors as illegal. Like I told you before, the king says it's illegal to kill my deer. You shoot a deer, you're automatically labeled a criminal. Two guys involved in this were a guy named Becker and Bloomer, and they were in the 60s. Gambling. I remember when running numbers was a terrible offense. I used to run numbers back in a little coal mining town called Bentleyville, about 150 miles west of here. And I was 5 years old. My mother was sort of like the neighborhood bookie, where she would gather numbers and money from people that wanted to play the numbers when it was illegal. And then I would take them, she'd give me a dime for an ice cream cone, and I'd take them up to the next person who was also an Italian named Chicatano, and she was the next higher level in a bookie arrangement. And but that was illegal. One day I was dropping off the money to Irma, that was her first name, and she was getting raided. And she's telling me to go away, I don't want any. And I didn't know what she's talking about, but I got the money in the slips. So this one sheriff comes out and says, oh, you can give it to me. And he asked me my name and where I lived and who my mother was. And I told my mother about this, she about died. She was on pins and needles for about a week and a half or 2 weeks, but she never got arrested. But anyway, the bottom line is, that was illegal back then because somebody said it was. Well, today, as you know, Pennsylvania is one of the biggest number runners in history. You know, coming up with a new game every week, you know, where you can win all this money. And you wonder sometimes where all those profits go to. But at any rate, another thing like bigamy and adultery. If you're a Mormon, adultery and bigamy don't exist because you're going to have multiple wives, not a big deal. You're expected to have multiple wives. Some other religions like Islam, you can have multiple wives. Depending on which group you're in, there's a limit to that. But the bottom line is that it's wrong adultery is wrong for Christian people because somebody said it was. And usually that person's your wife. Based on this idea of labeling, there's 4 categories of criminals. The one is the falsely accused, who really didn't commit a criminal act, but people said he did, or her. And so you kind of get labeled as being a criminal. I've seen that happen numerous times because of rumors and what have you. conformist would really be the non-criminal altogether, because the conformist follows whatever the law says. If the law says gambling is illegal, he doesn't gamble. Pure deviant defies the laws mentally and also in his physical behavior. And a secret deviant defies the laws, but nobody knows about it. So he has, like, everybody has a skeleton in her closet. That's what that's all about. Part of this theory is based on the writings of a guy named Emil Durkheim. And one of the best articles that you could read that kind of leads into this is called The Normal or Pathological. Now, Durkheim, in this article, says that you would never have beauty if you didn't label something ugly. You remember ever watching a Twilight Zone where they had the woman that was in the hospital, and they never show the faces of the doctors or the nurses. And then they show her face when they take the bandages off, and she's this really hot blonde, that has a beautiful face. Then they show the doctor and the nurses, and they're all like gougy eyes, and they're the ones that are ugly. But they're saying that the beautiful blonde in the hospital bed is the ugly one, and they're going to send her off to some camp to be with other people like her. And that's a perfect example that if you didn't have what you define as beauty, you wouldn't have ugly. And the same thing as if you didn't have people you labeled as criminals, you would never know what actually lawful is. So you have to have both in order to one to appreciate the other. And it says deviance or crime is functional society and keeps stability by defining boundaries. So it basically says you don't do this, you don't do that. Now, in primary deviance, there's no primary crime. There's no stigmatization. Like, how many of us speed at one time or the other? Just about everybody. Cheat on your income tax. Oh yeah, I think this $300 I spent at Juniata College on sweatshirts and paraphernalia, college paraphernalia. I'm gonna write that off as a donation. So that would be illegal. And you write it off as a donation on your income tax. Well, people do that quite often. So cheating on your income, that's like no big deal. You're not considered as a criminal. But they have what's called secondary deviance, and that's if you continue the minor issues like speeding, you get a reputation of being a bad driver, things like that, or you do commit something that's pretty serious. And eventually, if you get into this repetition of committing these acts that people consider as wrong, you develop what's called a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is basically you feel you're separated from society, and you can't be like everybody else because they won't accept you. This is something that's come along in recent years. When I say recent, anything since 1970. In reintegrator shaming theory, there's two ways to look at criminal behavior. One of them is that the person is stigmatized and they wear that label the rest of their life, like you're always an ex-con. But there's also a thing in this theory called reintegrator shaming, and that's where you encourage the person to change their ways, and you won't hold their criminal behavior against them. Basically, it says society forgives. And we've seen that since the 70s with the medicalization of crime or medicalization of deviance, like alcoholism. If you get fired, if you go to work drunk and they fire you, then you want to appeal it and you say, I have a disease. You can't fire me because I have a disease. So I'm going to go to AA and I'm going to get better. And once you're better, you're welcome back with open arms. Same thing with drug addiction. If you have some mental illness, like you're bipolar, you can take medicine for that. Or you're insane, that's not guilty by reason of insanity. They were sick, they weren't really a criminal, things like that. Another guy looks very professorial. Robert Merton. This explains why there's a lot of minorities in prison. In this theory, they say that people turn to crime when society pushes them to achieve big goals like wealth and success, but blocks their access to fair and legal methods to achieve them. So because of stuff like racism and other types of isms out there, people can't become successful by the traditional means, so they use an alternative method. And Merton had these 4 typologies based on whether you accept or reject the goals and the means of society. And then I have another slide after this what explains each one of these in more detail. Accept, you accept the means and the goals, you're conformist. You're successful and all that other good stuff. Now, if you reject the means, but you still want the goals, you're an innovator. Now, an innovator could be a drug dealer or anybody else that you, or a bank robber, and you want the success of wealth, but you don't want to go through the institutional means of getting it. So you come up with your own methods. Then you have the person who accepts the means but rejects the idea that they'll ever be wealthy. My father was probably the ideal or the model ritualist because he knew he'd never become rich, he'd never have a lot as far as wealth and possessions and things like that, but he never broke the law of his life, and he always accepted the institutional means, paid his income tax, all that other stuff, law-abiding citizen to the 9th degree. So he's a ritualist. And then if you reject both of them, you kind of withdraw from society and you're a retreatist, like a hermit. Now, a spin-off of this is the rebel who comes up with new means and new goals. Now that person may or may not be a criminal. These are like cults. Like, Jim Jones, you kind of reject the means of society, you reject the goals of society. You have to sign everything over to Jim, all your possessions and things like that. You live in a commune with them, so that's what goes on there. And this is just a little more of a explanation of these different typologies. Getting towards the end here, about to break time. I'm playing this off really well, I guess. General strain theory. That's a spin-off of the Robert Merton theory. This one takes in consideration a couple of things that Merton didn't. He said there's 3 levels of strain that can cause people to commit crime. Failure to achieve a goal, loss of a positive stimuli, or presentation of a negative stimuli. So what do you mean by that? Well, I had a couple of these written down here. At least I thought I did. I guess I don't. Failure to achieve a goal. Like, you try to become, what's a common goal we all have?
Own a home?
Yeah, there you go, that's a good one. You want to own a home. But no matter how much you save, no matter how much you work overtime and get a second job, you don't have enough money for that down payment. So because you're so frustrated you haven't been able to buy this house, it turns you into, you do something innovative in order to gain the money. Like become a bookie or something like that. Loss of positive stimuli, that means you're losing a loved one, you lose your job because of cutbacks or whatever, no fault of your own. And presentation of negative stimuli. This one here is primarily focused on stuff like bullying at school. And they have a big thing now about bullying, that they want you to report bullying, and they have these anti-bullying policies in schools because supposedly they've traced a lot of these school shootings, the kids that were bullied when they were younger. And they kind of like held it inside of them until they were at the point where they could do something about it, meaning buy a semi-automatic rifle and go back to school and kill a bunch of people, as if that would make it better. Examples of strain, like I said before, school failure, loss of social status, you get demoted, economic hardship, which we talked about, victimization and discrimination. Victimization could be you got robbed, and a good one with that is, for those of you that remember the Charles Bronson movies, Death Wish, you know, his wife was killed, so he becomes a vigilante and goes out and kills a bunch of bad guys in Death Wish 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They had a whole bunch of those. They got real stupider and stupider as they went along. But as most of those sequels do. But the bottom line, that's what we're looking at there. By the way, Charles Bronson's from Crescent. You know that? Yeah. So, now, the strain, according to Agnew, some people have their glass half empty, some have it half full. Some people see a problem as an opportunity to be creative. Others people see a problem as being doomed and whatever. This strain can lead to healthy coping skills, improved problem-solving skills. You get social support from people around you. You can get counseling. So, you know, you can overcome the strain with healthy coping skills. On the other hand, if you have limited coping skills, you turn to theft, violence, and drug use. You know, you just want to like drift away in a drug use. You want to become numb to society. What goes along with using drugs? Selling drugs to support the drug habit, which opens all kinds of problems. Violence. Instead of someone insults you, instead of like biting your tongue and thinking of a better way to get back to them, back at them later, you react with a violent outrage, you know, whack them upside the head or something like that. You know, a good one with the limited coping options, which actually would be more of the problem solving of the positive one. If you saw Trading Places, what they did to Winthorpe and Valentine. Valentine is Eddie Murphy, and Winthorpe is Dan Aykroyd. And where they turned him, Aykroyd was the nephew of the brokers, and they turned him into a criminal by taking everything he had. And then what they do in the end, to get back at him, they turn, who are those? Don Amici and who's the other guy?
Bellamy.
Ralph Bellamy. They turn them into poor guys by ruining their orange crop
Gambling.
report they had.
That was gambling. They were all betting on
Right.
the price of. So it was no different than numbers. Eddie Murphy said, "Just legalize numbers game."
It was futures.
That's what he said
Well,
when they
that's a
taught.
little
That's
bit
what he
different.
said when they taught him how to do it.
Oh, okay.
And that Bellamy says, and no matter you
Oh, and they
lose
are-
or
no matter-
win,
They win or
then we
lose, we get
still
our
make
money anyway.
money.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's still going on.
Last one I'm going to look at a little bit is psychological theories of crime. This might be the most difficult to really, truly understand. And I even have a problem with this from time to time. Criminal behavior is a result of individual mental processes, personality traits, early life experiences. I had went to a conference one time, and the presenter talked about personality developing by the time you're 6 years old. By the time you're 6 years old, your personality is pretty much set in stone. You are who you're going to be, with some minor variation. And the only way that is going to change is if you have what he called a significant emotional event. A significant emotional event is something that makes you reevaluate your goals in life and the way you view things, and it makes you change your behavior. Now, what's a significant emotional event? Something different for everybody. For some people, it's getting married. For some people, it's having a kid. For some people, it's hearing that door clang behind you and you don't have the keys. It could be anything. And for some guys it doesn't matter. Like that clanging of the door. Hey, I used to come to visit Uncle George with my mother and would come into the prison at clang doors all the time. You know, he didn't bother him any. And his brothers went to prison, his father went to prison, so I guess it's his job to go to prison. You know, so that wouldn't be a big emotional event going to prison for a guy who lived with it. But all of these psychological theories are based on Freud's id, ego, and superego concepts. Id is the same for everybody. Those are your instinctual desires, like you want to be warm, you want to be full, you want to be happy. Same for a criminal. They got the same thing. They want to be successful. They want their idea of the full belly and all that other stuff. Now, ego is the reality-oriented mediator. That's your outside controls. If the controls are strong, then your id will be controlled by, like, for example, your desire, if you're criminal minded and your desire is to have wealth, if reality has a good set of rules, enforcement in place, as far as guards at banks, police on a walking the beat and stuff like that you see a police presence, then that's going to control you as far as your behavior goes. Now the superego is your moral consciousness, which means your ability to know right from wrong. So you kind of like have to juggle these three all together. And the person who commits crimes has a very weak superego. They don't have much of a moral conscience. They still want to be successful in their own way, and as long as the reality-oriented mediator is weak, they can do what they want. If the reality-oriented mediator is strong, then it keeps them in check. And that kind of ties in with some of those other theories. This criminal behavior learned through interaction with the environment, observational learning, that's part of the differential association theory too. And certain personality traits are associated with criminal behavior, like psychopathology, impulsiveness, low empathy, things that those are some of the traits we had under the deposit in school. Cognitive theory talks about how an individual perceives, interprets, and processes information. That has a little bit to do with, has a lot to do with how smart you are. Like cognitive brain function. Are you able to see the forest through the trees type of thing? Are you able to interpret what's going on around you so that you can make use of that? If you see a challenge, you can respond to the challenge. It takes a little more on the ball. There are some mental health factors involved here. Poor socialization can cause crime, and mental illness, especially like schizophrenia. Not everybody who's mentally ill commits crime, and not all crime is committed by people mentally ill. But especially schizophrenia, you get a you have a distorted view of reality, and it causes you to see things that aren't there, to imagine things that don't exist, which causes you then to commit different crimes, everything from property crime to homicide. I can't remember who it was, but somebody killed their kids because they didn't want them to grow up to be sinners. But anyway, that's the kind of thinking, with the mental illness, is that they have a distorted view. So, and with that, it's right 1 o'clock and we're done. Yeah. So, what kind of questions you have? Yes, ma'am.
Basically just two approaches that I don't think were covered thoroughly on your presentation. It was a very thorough presentation, but the new crime seems to be multi-millionaires, billionaires who learn. Wait, I just need to if you don't mind.
That's
I just
one of
need
the,
to say about how they're hacking into computers and committing all kinds of crime on that level, and they're like the perfect white little skinny guy who's a nerd and he just learns how to do it. So he's had all the benefits, but he turns it to crime.
that's one of the flaws of strain theory. Yeah, if I had more time, I probably would have brought that up. One of the flaws of strain theory says that you are blocked from achieving success and your goals because of discrimination or whatever. Well, that doesn't explain why wealthy people commit crime, like you're saying. And I think it was Madoff who built a whole bunch of people out of billions of dollars. He said that before he ever started the Ponzi scheme that led to him getting all this money, he had more money than he could ever spend in his lifetime. So why does a guy like that, who
Power.
already has millions, needs tens of millions more?
Just about power.
Oh
It's
yeah.
about power.
Well, yeah, that's
Well, it could be a
that would
branch.
be a whole new branch of that you have to spend. That's why I'm saying one size never fits all.
So when you think about that, can it kind of be like a rush and a high to them that they have this addiction, just like people using drugs? You know what I mean? And you get that rush of,
Oh, they get
okay,
the,
I got away with it, and then they constantly do it because it becomes an addiction.
yeah, that's a part of it too. They just do it because they can.
Yeah.
And like this gentleman said, it's a thing of power.
If
like
they
as
have
long as I
more
can
money
do
than
this.
they know what to do with, they're just, a lot of these guys that are rich,
Yeah.
why don't they share the wealth? I mean, like Carnegie and like Hershey, but these days, greed has become a virtue in our society now. There's no stigmatism to it at all.
Well, I don't want to get political about this, but yeah, that's a pretty good assessment.
It seems to get away with it, you know.
Yes.
When you were talking about stealing from the Wawa,
Yes.
You have a different
Well,
idea
stuff
of how
from
to
the
do it.
sheds here.
People are not using cash anymore. If you go anywhere like
Well,
Sheep,
that's true.
so I was wondering if there has been a decrease in that type of crime because people are using debit cards to buy a Coke and a bag of chips. So there's no money in the coffers to make it worthwhile.
I think there's still enough in there. You might not be getting the $20,000 by 10 o'clock that you did
No.
30 years ago.
No.
But on the other hand, I would think that you're still getting enough for a pretty good drug haul that if you have to go down and see your local drug dealer and pick up your month's supply of cocaine or week's supply, you could do that. But yeah, you wouldn't have the big money.
Yeah.
But that's a good point. Yeah, so that's another thing. Who else had something? You had something else?
Yes, I think I grew up in the 50s, and families, neighborhoods, relatives took care of and watched each other's children. They were responsible, they reacted. It's not the same way now in a neighborhood, and I'm not talking about low income like Huntington. I'm talking about Philadelphia, where you have inner city homeless families. You have children walking to horrific level schools, low level schools, past parks filled with syringes. I mean, this is like an unbelievable, horrible thing. And a gang that if you don't join them, they will destroy you and your family. It's not the same thing anymore.
Well, yeah, that's that's the same with almost everything in society. Like, we originally came here in 1979,
From
and this from we were living in Westmoreland County then, and that's when I became deputy up here. But what I'm getting at is, in 1979 in downtown Huntington, there was Sears, Western Auto,
yeah,
Montgomery Ward's, J.C. Penney's, 3 or 4 clothing stores. There were 2 theaters.
5 shoe stores.
No empty stores.
Right, everything was.
That's crazy.
Now look at it. You know, Wendy's just closed.
A lot of
Somebody wrote me a note about that. I said, I'm sure there'll either be a tattoo parlor or a used clothing
Or
store.
skills, those gambling places.
Right, and they're creeping up everywhere.
Yeah.
We're
And
buying
gyms.
college.
And gyms are the other thing that are creeping up everywhere.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is things change and they're never the same. And like you were saying, like sense of community, everybody knew who, in my neighborhood, I was in a very small town, but like when somebody died, the neighborhood, if they were in the neighborhood, people went door to door, somebody went door to door to get money, asking for money to send a bouquet from the neighborhood. You made up a pan of food to take to the deceased's house so they didn't have to cook. You don't get that kind of thing anymore.
Well, they still do.
It doesn't mean they're bad, it doesn't mean it's bad, it just means it's different.
And then there's the thing about racism and bigotry. You have, and I checked the statistics, that people of color and people who are white commit crimes at the same rate, but white people are arrested more often, found guilty more often, and their sentences are longer than people of color.
No,
White
you
people.
gotta
Are you
stop
sure
it.
with that?
No, you guys are.
I don't think so.
Well,
you
I
sure
just
with that,
researched it
Vic?
within the last
No,
couple
I did
months.
that,
Yes, you.
I was
you
an
straight
expert
had it
witness for
backwards.
years.
Yeah. Well,
And-
things have changed.
Well, I know that, what I'm saying is that when I did the research, black men were given the most serious sentences for the same crime, followed by, black women, or wait a minute, how did they, black men were always given the most serious crime. White women were given the least serious, or given the most serious sentences, white women were given the least serious sentence. Behind the black man was a black woman, and then the white man, and then the white woman.
And then you've got the brown and Asian, so when you
Well,
add those all
we're
together,
talking minorities, but yeah, once you get into these other groups, it's harder to get the
so
stats.
that's why you have disproportionate amount in prisons. And according to the research I've done.
Okay,
Well, how about
not all
the thing-
research point to the same
How about the
conclusion.
thing about if people are in prison, there's some people that had committed victimless crimes and people that hurt themselves. So I hear these stories about people who hurt somebody, rape somebody, assault somebody, and for some reason they get let out again. And then years later we hear about how they killed somebody.
That's a
They
big
finally
problem.
put them. So if it's a victimless crime, let them out. If they hurt somebody, don't let them out. And the system is completely arbitrary. There's no stand. I grew up watching the Lone Ranger and stuff where all you had to do is catch the guy and the justice would prevail. It's a bunch of bullshit. There's no standard, no common standard.
Well, we could talk for hours on that one.
Well, that's what you said was nice, but that's all history. What we're talking about now is what's really going on.
Well, the point is that right now, there's no single answer, and for every individual, you could pull out some ideas that I presented to you, even going back to the guy with the spear chucker there with the atavist with the different traits and everything, you might get something out of that. And before I forget, I wanted to recommend a book to you. It's called Whoever Fights Monsters by a guy named Robert Ressler. Now, I don't know if they have it here or not, but it talks about criminal profiling, and that's really an excellent book if you like this crime type of stuff. But
They can get it here.
that's like 40 years old,
No, they can find it someplace.
but it's an excellent book for that. And the Stanley Haas guy I told you about, there's a book on him called Born to Lose, written by a friend of mine who actually worked with the prison with him, where I was at.
Can I just make a statement about the closing of mental institutions?
Can you speak a little louder, please?
The closing of mental institutions.
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah.
how that has affected
Yeah,
the crime in our country, the homelessness, the
horrific.
drug.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, it started in the 1980s with President Reagan. He's the one who closed all the federal.
I'm just saying it
Well, it
has
was before
affected.
that. Pennsylvania was closing mental institutions in the 70s.
Right, but now
And-
those people are in prison instead of getting help.
And one of the reasons they were closing them was because they were abusing the inmates in those mental institutions. That if Big Joe was a good apple picker, ran the apple picking machine at a state facility where they had apple orchards. Oh well, geez, the apples are going to be ripe come September. we can't let Big Joe out yet until after we get the apple crop in.
Oh, yeah.
So I'd keep him for an extra 3 months to make sure he got the apple crop
Yeah.
in, then I'd let him go.
And Big Joe's on the
And-
street now.
Right, and you know what else, I remember when I was leaving here to go to Westchester, I had a guy that was maxing out, which means you can't keep him anymore. He was nuttier than an outhouse rat. And I called everywhere trying to get him a structured plan to get out of prison. Nobody would talk to me about it. I called the police, the Salvation Army, everybody you think of in Philadelphia. We moved down to the Philadelphia area. About 2 months later, I see on the news this guy killed a railroad cop because he was sleeping on in a railroad property like was homeless, and a guy came over and told him to leave, and he stabbed him to death. And that's the same guy that I knew that he was bad. I knew he was destined to hurt somebody else.
So the
But
money,
there's nothing you can do about
but
it.
that's because the money isn't spent where it should be. I mean, you were right, you should add, those programs are just pushed off to the side.
So, at any event, it's a quarter after, so I guess
Thank you.
Mrs. D
Thank
wants to
you.
throw us out. Thank you.
What's the name of that book again?
Whoever Fights Monsters.
I just sent it to you.
And the author was Robert Ressler.
Yes, and it's $8.50 on Amazon.